the single responsibility principle. What is it? It's tempting to say this. Each class should have one responsibility. But that's not quite right. Let's look at an example. Consider a game where you have to aim an arrow at a target. Depending on where you hit the target, you get a certain number of points. This program is likely to have a class called target, so we can ask, all right, what is the single responsibility of the target class? One way to do it is to say that the target class represents a physical target in the game, which is fine and it sounds like a single responsibility. Or we could say the exact same thing in slight more detail, which would mean something like this. So how do we know what is a single responsibility? The first answer to this is, it depends on how complex your program is. So in other words, complexity leads to more classes in the program, means each class has to have a more specific responsibility. The second and more useful answer is to say that each class has no more than one source of potential change. So let's look at what that means for our target class. We'll take a look at a couple of responsibilities that it used to have and decide, do they have different sources of potential change? If so, they should be different responsibilities. So let's look at two tasks from our previous list and decide if they're different responsibilities. The first one is the decision of how many points the players earned by hitting a particular location on the target. And the second task is using the location on the target to determine what angle the arrow should be displayed at. Assuming you're programming this as part of a team inside a larger company, it's probably a safe bet that the person who makes decisions about the point system and how many points a player earns under what circumstances is probably not the same person as whoever is making decisions about the visual elements and how everything is displayed on the screen. Those would be two potential sources of change. So in other words, the two responsibilities listed on the screen are different responsibilities. That's not actually true. What if you're making the entire program yourself? Then everything is done by one person. The point isn't that we know that two different people are making those decisions independently. It's that they could make those decisions independently. That's what makes those two tasks different responsibilities. Okay, so let's create two new classes. We can have one class for each of those two responsibilities. The first one, determining the number of points earned by each hit, that can be figured out within the point calculator class. In other words, it might take many different methods or functions to figure out what exactly is the point total, but it's one responsibility. All of those methods are working together to do one thing. Our second class we'll call Arrow Presenter. And it's responsible for the appearance of the arrow, figuring out in 3D the different angles involved and what that means for the appearance of the arrow. So if it was an even more complicated program, we might have more than one class responsible for how the arrow looks, how the light glints off of it, where the shadows lie, all that kind of stuff. But in a smaller program, it might just be one class that figures out which of the various images of an arrow should be displayed based on some sort of calculation. So that's one responsibility. Might be many different methods, but it's one responsibility. But wait, you might say, are we really talking about people as a potential source of change? Yes. Yes, we are. Or if it helps, we're talking about decisions that can be made by people independently of each other. We don't want two different people telling you how to change your class. This means rewriting and retesting your class over and over, which makes your class less open-closed. In our next video, we'll talk about the open-closed principle. In summary, the single responsibility principle says that each class should have at most one reason to change, or at most one person making decisions about how your class could change. That's the main idea.